Welcome, everybody. Another edition of No Driving Gloves. We have three people on mics tonight. We got me, obviously, like always, Sean, and we have a special guest this evening, Tom Cotter. For those of you that don't know Tom, he's a TV personality. He's a, I want to say, YouTube personality. He's an author, kind of well known around the car circles. So I'm assuming if you do listen to this show, you know who Mr. Cotter is. And Tom, do you want to give us a brief little 2-minute biography of you, or I guess at that point would be autobiography? We'll see where the show rolls from there.
Sure. Well, if I go to a party, I'm either the most boring guy there or the most exciting guy there, depending on if there's car people in the crowd. I've never done anything in my life that didn't include cars. I mean, I've never played golf. I don't fish. I don't hunt. I don't follow any sports. So, if I'm at a party with a bunch of athletic junkies, well, I ain't the guy. But if you want to talk cars, I can talk all day long. It's all I've ever done. I collect them. I work on them. I race them. I write about them. I now have a video series, so I talk about them and I get feedback. It's an amazing world, and I've met the most amazing people through cars that I'm sure that, other folks play golf or tennis or baseball have never had the opportunity. But I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I was with Roger Penske at Amelia Island. He's a billionaire with 67,000 employees, and it's just through cars that we met and talked. And, we've been friends for almost 40 years. And yet I'm just as excited about some guy down the street building a rat rod out of a almost worthless Model A Ford. So I'm all over the map. So there you go.
I think both Sean and I can relate to that. We're both both car junkies. I really don't understand other sports. I think we were watching, my fiance and I were watching The Rookie, a Disney thing, because we've got Disney Plus amongst all of this. And they were doing something, the little kid, 12 years old or something, goes up to bat. And I said, "What do you mean? He's playing for the Cubs. It's National League. They don't have the designated hitter." And she looked at me and said, "You know that?" I don't know if you guys know that, but she was amazed that I knew that much about baseball. It's cars, and it's the old, I say the Porsche Club uses it, the Viper Club uses it. The cars bring us together. The people keep us together, and you seem to meet a lot of great people, and we talk about that a lot on this show, is how cars are a nice join in that. I don't know if you've been lucky throughout your life or just put yourself in the right places, or are you somebody that really, takes a risk? That's another problem my fiance and I have, is she doesn't quite necessarily like my entrepreneurial spirit, because I take some risks and it makes her uncomfortable.
Well, I was born into a non-car family on Long Island in New York, and Islip Speedway is kind of the extent of it for me when I was a kid, and unfortunately I missed the Bridgehampton Trans Am races and Can-Am races. But I realized to make a living in the car business, and more specifically in the racing business, I probably had to be off Long Island. So that's what moved me 35 years ago from New York to North Carolina to get a job in a NASCAR related industry. And I've taken chances, but I'm pretty good at kind of rolling the dice and realizing, I would never take a chance to put my family in hock or to lose our house. It's really, I think, more hard work. Just roll up my sleeves and just do what had to be done to become successful.
I would say getting into NASCAR 35 years ago, that was just about the right time, if I remember.
Well, it happened to be exactly the right time, and that was, I'd rather be lucky than good, because I was a road racing fan, and I really wanted to get a job and have a career in IMSA, sports car racing. I got offered a job. I had been a furniture salesman for 5 years. My thing is, I went to school, and then out of school, I opened a auto repair shop specializing in Japanese cars, and then went from there to auto parts, and then car sales on a showroom floor, and then I became disenchanted, and for 5 years I worked in Manhattan in the furniture business. Then I said, what am I doing? Like, I'm a car guy. What am I doing selling couches? So I worked hard nights and weekends and got myself known as a writer for sports car publications, and I got offered a job on a NASCAR program. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? Man, I want to be in sports car racing. I want to be in IMSA. Maybe if I do a good enough job in NASCAR, I'll be, well thought of enough to one day get a job in IMSA. Well, in 1982, that was, the NASCAR was kind of floundering. IMSA was starting to go down. NASCAR was starting to go up, and I got on the escalator at exactly the right moment, and rode that until let's see, from 82 probably for 20 years until I had an opportunity to sell my agency and buy a Cobra and drive off into the sunset. And so have I been lucky? I don't know, but I've always had this carrot in front of me, and the carrot in front of me that I always had to strive for was I was successful if I could one day own a Cobra. And this is something that I said to myself back in the 70s. Well, it happened.
I love the goal is had the opportunity to buy a Cobra, not pad the IRA, not pay off the house. Buy a Cobra. I want the Cobra.
Well, it's a friend of mine. I put on these Cobra tours every year for authentic 289 and 427 Cobras, and every year after dinner we all stand up and give our little spiel about how we got here or whatever. And this guy, a friend of mine in California, who owns a bunch of Cobras, named Drew Serb, he got up and talked about it, and he said, I sold my first business to buy a Cobra. No, he sold his first Cobra to buy a business, and I got up right after him and I said, I sold my first business to buy a Cobra. So, ultimately he got a lot more Cobras than I ever got, but it's okay. We all kind of type A personalities, and we all set our lives to one day be able to own the car that as kids we dreamed of.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to have that goal. My dad accidentally started a durable medical equipment company in the late 70s, and really his goal is, once he realized that, he had started a company and this was going to be his career path, his goal was to have a Mercedes convertible. And the day that he could pay cash for one, he walked into the Mercedes dealership, sat down in one, and honestly didn't like the driving position, and he's never owned one to this day. But
Wow.
But he had the goal, and that was the driving force, and that's probably a drawback I have. I'm not sure if I have a driving force goal. That's why I got into restoration, as I figured I wasn't going to be a successful enough attorney to buy all the cars, and this would give me the opportunity to drive them, and it's exposed me to a lot. Sure. But you've always wanted this 289, or this Cobra, we'll say, and you've been a successful businessman. You sell your business, and you go out and you buy this Cobra. And then all of a sudden you decide to drive cross country. Was this something you had planned when you bought the car, or was it, I've got this car and, I've got, a couple dollars in the bank. I'm going to take a road trip. And I don't know, was it to drive Route 66, or was it just to drive cross country, or,
Well, no, I mean, I lived on the East Coast and the car was on the West Coast. And I didn't want to make a mistake and buy the wrong car. So I did a lot of homework, found out where all the serial numbers were, didn't want to buy an air car, which is a car that kind of just, materialized out of somebody's fabrication shop. I wanted to buy a real Cobra that had no stories attached to it, and investigated one that was in Walnut Creek, California, a suburb of San Francisco. Went out there and test drove it for, the guy I bought it from had driven it probably less than 400 miles in the several years he owned it. And I drove it almost that many miles in one day. And I came back to his house at the end of the day. I said, okay, I'll take it. He said, well, how are you going to have it shipped home? Or when do you want to have it picked up? I said, well, what I'd like to do, this was in, I think, January or February. I said, I'd like to come back in May and drive it home. He said, you're crazy. Well, so I called a friend, Peter Egan, who at the time was writing for Road and Track magazine. And we just took our time and took 9 days to drive across the United States and took all the back roads, 2-lane highways, and went north, went south, always heading east, but not directly east. It was the trip of a lifetime. And Peter wrote an amazing story for Road and Track about it. And if any of your listeners want to refer to it, you can just search for the title Cross Country Cobra in Road and Track magazine's archives. And it's an amazing story that here I am almost 20 years later, And when people, I might meet somebody at a car show or something, and I say, "Is this the car that Peter Egan drove across country?" I said, "Yeah." How can people? I'm wondering myself, how can people remember? I have a hard time remembering my zip code, but these people can remember details to a story that was written almost 20 years ago. It's just amazing. So
chime in and go, but I drove it too.
Oh yeah, well, it didn't matter. But the amazing thing is that here's a 2-seater car that 1 million people went along for the ride, and like that's the definition of a good writer, to take that many people along for the ride, and it's a ride they remember 2 decades later. Just amazing.
Is that what inspired you to become the kind of full-time writer you are now? I mean, we'll talk about a little bit of the subjects of the books and that, but is that Peter writing that story and the way it kind of impacted people? Because, I've met Peter a couple of times. He was really good friends with our one of the guys at the museum, Brian Slark. They go way back, and I remember Peter's story from 1983 where he built a Westfield 11, which is a Lotus 11 replica, and that's where I remember Peter, and I remember that story, and that might have really been my first indoctrination into the Lotus car world. It became a major part of my career and a major part of my life. It's, I think I told you pre-show, that's how I ended up in Birmingham, is just a passion for Lotus. And
yeah. Well, no, I was a writer before that, and even though at the time I had just sold my agency, I had been on the masthead for Road and Track for, I guess, several years prior to that point, and then a number of years after that point. So I was like their East Coast guy for a while, which to me was a fantasy, because as a 15-year-old or a 19-year-old, man, one day I want to write for Road and Track or Car and Driver. And one day the editor called me in my office and said, we could really use a guy on the East Coast to cover things that we can't do here back in California. We have to send a guy cross country. Would you be our guy? I said, oh my God, that was Tom Bryant that called me. Tom Bryant just died a couple weeks ago, but that phone call was a life-altering experience for me. And I didn't have to make the phone call or make the pitch. They called me. Oh my goodness.
That's not normal. That's awesome. That's very awesome.
And those cross-country trips is kind of how I was able to reach out to you. How, most recently, I believe you did it in a Model T that was owned by a friend of mine.
Right.
How many of these cross-country trips, these dream trips, I want to say, have you done? Is it just the Cobra and the T, or is it
I've done a number of times, and it's always been in an unusual car. I mean, it's just, my wife and I did it in the 240Z back in the 70s, soon after we were married, like 77, I guess. In a 240Z that I had paid $900 for, had a blown head gasket. I fixed it. We had the car painted, put new seat covers on, and took off for, a whole summer of cross country driving. I've driven my Woody across the United States a couple of times. I've driven Route 66 for a book. I drove the Model T for a book. I drove my truck and trailer out there to pick up a Lotus once to bring home. So I've probably made, I'm guessing, a half dozen cross-country trips, and I hope I can make more. I mean, it's almost any moment I would love somebody to call me and say, hey, can you drive something out to California for me? Oh man, would I? Yes. So I'd love to.
Oh, that's kind of the way to do it, is use somebody else's car and being able to take the time. Every time I travel or go on vacation, I have that hard time of making myself slow down and stop. And the trips that I actually go and there's no real time frame, or I'm not desperate to get from point A to point B, those seem to be the most memorable trips I've ever had. Still have yet to do the C-to-C type run.
I've been very fortunate to get to do that a couple times, actually, with a manufacturer's car, basically, and 16,000 miles in 3 months, and just going. And I know that I came across some things on those trips that I'll never forget, and destinations that you really want to make it back to. Do you have any destinations like that out there that, like, every time you do a cross country trip, you have to go back by there, you have to repeat it?
I don't, but it's amazing, because between all the cross country trips I've driven, all the Barn Find Hunter YouTube series shows I've done, and my previous life doing corporate ride and drive programs, journalist programs for Mercedes-Benz and BMW, and doing Cobra tours for buddies for the last 16 years. I kind of know the United States too well. I mean, I'll be driving somewhere, with my wife somewhere, and I'll say, "Oh, there's a real good custard stand around the corner." She says, "How do you know that?"
Yeah. Yeah, you got to stop and check out Hard 8 Barbecue when you're going through Texas. And yeah, I get it. Yeah, totally get it.
Although, when I land in either San Francisco or LA, I know where the closest In-N-Out burger is, and bam, I'm right there.
Of course you do. Animal style, man. It's all about double doubles. Gotta have it. Gotta have it.
Yeah.
And here I am. I've never been to an In-N-Out burger. Sorry, all West Coast fans and listeners out there.
We can remedy that. It's not a problem. Matter of fact, if we flew out there right now, we basically have a plane to ourselves.
That's true.
Yeah,
it'd be fine. And it definitely would be an In-N-Out burger.
It'd be like owning an A330.
I did a little bit of research and tried to do a little prep for this interview, which says a lot because a lot of times we just go into them all cold and figure out where we're going to go. And sure. I listened to Mark Green and Cars Yaz. I'm a regular listener, and you appeared on like episode 214 or something of his show, and I don't know if you've made it back because he's at, 1,500 or 1,600.
Oh, yeah, a number of times, yeah.
And that was a 2014 episode. And, I stuck a couple of your books up on our webpage, Amazon affiliate links, just in case anybody hears this and wants to, pick up one of your books. I know it's not the most profitable way. It's probably better to buy it directly from you, but it's kind of the easiest way to link them. And sure. You were only I think you only had 10 or 11 books out at that time, but you don't stop writing. As a matter of fact, even right before the show, as we were waiting for Sean to get online and get some stuff solved, you were clattering away on your keyboard, I believe, writing another book. How many books do you have out there at this time? And I know there's various series, cross country, things you found in the barn, something about back alleys or things, just barn finds in Detroit alone. Do you even know how many books you've got published? Or?
I think 16 or 17. I've done a couple twice. I had to rewrite them when they come out for new editions. You add to them, add new chapters, or go back and fill in the blanks, or make corrections and things like that. So whether that constitute a whole new writing, I'm not sure, but probably 16 or 17. So I've done, I think the Barn Find books alone, I've done at least 10, which started with my second book. My first book was a book about Holman Moody. It was a biography about a Ford racing team back mostly in the 60s. And the second book was The Cobra in the Barn. And I thought I was the only one in the world that enjoyed looking for old cars. I mean, really, it was something I've done since I was 12 years old. I'd get this magazine called Rod and Custom. And in the back of Rod and Custom, there was a column, regular monthly column, called Vintage Tin. And it was these California guys who go out in the desert and drag home a 32 Ford Roadster or something. And I was always infatuated. And being on Long Island, it didn't have that same, I didn't have that same opportunity, but I still enjoyed looking at people's backyards or looking in their garage doors when you went by on weekends and they were doing the lawn and the garage doors open and there was a Jaguar. I talked to my publisher. He said, "Tom, I think that's your next book. So let's give it a shot." So it was The Cobra in the Barn. That started, that book still sells. It's the best-selling book I've ever had. It never stops selling well. And it's a bunch of bite-sized stories about, interesting cars that people have found, pictures as found, and the stories. And that led to, The Cobra in the Barn led to the Hemi in the Barn and the Vincent in the Barn and the Corvette in the Barn, the Harley in the Barn, and 50 Shades of Rust and blah, 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 on and on and on. And then the Barn Find road trips. I stopped doing the books where it was just me sitting on a keyboard in my den interviewing people over the phone. It was now me hitting the road with a couple of buddies and hitting 4 states for 2 weeks. Barn Find road trip, Route 66 Barn Find road trip, which was driving from Chicago to LA looking for old cars along the way. That was a type of book that I've written a number of, but I really, really enjoy writing biographical type books. I wrote a book about a drag racer named TV Tommy Ivo, who I admired as a kid. He drive these 4-engine dragsters, and I, even as a 12-year-old, how does a 4-engine dragster? How do you hook up the drive shafts, the axles? How do you get the power from the engines down the ground? And I was able to ask these questions that have been on my mind my whole life. And then I did a book about a guy named Dean Jeffries, who was the other California customizer to George Barris. And I became great friends with Dean. And so I like writing biographies because people let you into their lives. They tell you the most intimate parts of their lives, and they trust that you're going to do a good job with it, and you're going to make them appear to be the people that fans think they are, or better. They trust that you're not going to make them look worse. And I love that, the trust involved in doing a biography. So I'm kind of doing a biography now. It's going to be a long-term project, several years, but I'm writing about the history of Porsche racing in America. And it's a book that's never been written. America is the biggest market for Porsche, so racing is a critical marketing tool for selling cars here because, gearheads like racing, and gearheads go out and pay money for Porsche. So that's what I'm writing at the moment. I'll probably, I may even write another one between now and the end of this book because I'm kind of a neophyte Porsche guy. I've owned a couple, but I am not a PCA guy. I'm not a Porsche guy, but I love history and I love racing, and I love bringing information to people that they had not known before. So that's why I jumped at this opportunity when the publisher gave me.
Yeah. That is an unbelievably deep rabbit hole that you're diving down. That book has the ability to be the size of twice War and Peace, basically.
Well, it's going to be 320 pages, 100,000 words, and lots of pictures. So that's going to be awesome. I can't nosedive down into every little nook and cranny. A friend of mine who I used to work with, his name is Randy Leffingwell, has written like 48 books, mostly car books. And he's writing the history of Porsche racing in the world.
Oh, wow.
And he's written several books since, but he started this book in 2009. So he started 11 years ago. He's up to 1980 now, and he's got more than 1 million words down in the manuscript.
He's going to need to will that book, the finishing of that book to someone. That's like building a cathedral back in 1500 and finishing it in about 2002.
Right. And he's been to Stuttgart. He'll stay for a month in Stuttgart. He'll stay at an engineer's house or one of their research assistants' house, and he'll just live there and just go through their archives. It's just amazing.
That's incredible.
Do I need to write a book that detailed? I don't, but I want to give Americans, or I want to give readers, period, kind of a pretty good snapshot of what it took to make Porsche a racing brand in the States. Interestingly, working with the Revs collection down in Naples, and Carl Ludvigsen, who is an amazing writer, has done 4 dozen books. We've determined that the very first Porsche to turn competitive laps in the United States was 1951. A guy named Eduardo Fernandez. Actually, it was Italian originally. He lived in England until the war. After the war, moved to the States and became a car dealer in Chicago. He drove his 51 Porsche Coupe at Elkhart Lake, 4 laps, retired, finished 37th, but those were the first competitive laps ever turned in the United States. So nobody ever realized that before, so that was kind of cool to realize.
Yeah, I'm hearing the contrast between the two books you alluded to, the worldwide Porsche racing history, and that sounds like it's going to be a great deep dive for the Porsche aficionado, your PCA guy, because I don't know, as much as I'm into cars, I don't know if I could sit down and read 1 million words, and if he's only...
and he's only up to 1980.
Yeah, and I say 1980, and Porsche really is mid-40s, so he's only halfway through Porsche. And...
Right.
So, but, by the time he's finished, it would be halfway through. And you're writing 100,000 words, 300 and some pages. I guess that's what the publisher dictated. And it's, I think it's going to be a much better read, something easier to sit down and comprehend. I've got a friend, he's a he's a 9-ball player, and he's written the blue book of pool cues, and his family owns a gun shop, and they're the world's foremost experts on the Luger. And they sat down, or his dad sat down to write about the Luger, and was just going to write a little history of the Luger. And when they were done, it was like 1,200 or 1,300 pages, and came out as a 3-volume set. And really deep dive in. And it's self-published because of my friend, and he handles all his publishing and distribution and things like that. It's just the nature. It's a side business to the gun business, and you can really dive deep down those holes. And I even have that problem trying to write brief articles when I write articles for the Remark, which is the Lotus Club newsletter, or the Car Club newsletters, or anything I write. I get a little bit long-winded. Sometimes I do on the podcast.
Give us a chapter or two on Brumos and some really, really good pictures of Brumos, and I'm happy. It could literally be
interesting
in America, and I'm happy.
I read every word of the book Hurley, who was written by Sean Cridwell, I think his name is, and Sean is right now deep into writing the book on Brumos and the Brundage family. It's really about the Brundage family who moved from New York to Miami, and the Brundages used to race cars. I think they started off in MGTDs, ultimately in a Porsche. And then they were given the opportunity to move from Miami up to Jacksonville to open a Porsche dealership. And Brumos is BRU from Brundage Motors, MOS.
Yep.
And so that's where the word Brumos comes from. And Brundage invented the Formula V as a lesser priced alternative to a Formula Junior. It's an amazing story. So before I started my book, I called Randy. I said, I want to make sure that I am not competing with your book in the same audience. He said, absolutely not. I called Sean. I want to make sure I'm not competing with you. He said, absolutely not. So this will be a book that will, include a lot of Randy stuff, only U.S. stuff, it'll have probably sidebars on Brumos, which is Sean's doing. I've recently become friends with Todd Holbert, Al Holbert's son, who doesn't live far from me. And actually, he's the third generation to be involved in racing. He runs Toyota Racing Development, the TRD operation here in North Carolina, and he's going to help me with a lot of the Holbert stuff. I'm going to talk to Jim Busby and Rick Knoop and Dennis Ossie, and at Amelia Island I met Peter Gregg's son. And I've got to hurry up though, because the earlier generation of guys, the earliest generation, are rapidly leaving us, or most of them are gone, and the second generation are getting older. So I need to jump in and do these interviews before there's no opportunity anymore.
That's a big story to tell, man. It's really exciting to hear that you're going to do that. I have some background with Porsche, and was very fortunate to get to work with Bob Snodgrass for a couple of years actually on a progress on a project, and just really, really dove into what Brumos had to offer. So I'm excited to get the book. I really am.
I live in Maine in the summer, and I was going to start it this summer because I go up there and I just sit on a porch and just write. Here we are locked down with COVID-19 for maybe 2 months. I don't know. I said, I'll never have this opportunity again to have this much time just to me. That I won't be interrupted by people knocking at the door or having to go out to do something, go to dinner or whatever. And so my contract with my publisher is not even inked yet. But I called them. I said, I can't lose this opportunity. I'm diving in right now.
Are you banging it out? I mean, is it coming? Is it coming pretty well? That's good to hear.
Oh yeah,
good to hear.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now. So I put a post on Facebook, because I don't want to have to buy. Randy said, be prepared to buy several $1,000s worth of books. I put a Facebook note on there. I said, you know what? I'm doing a Porsche book, and this is, if you have any books that you'll loan me, I'll give them back in 3 years. And I've got every day UPS deliveries coming to my door with buddies sending me books. So I've got all the reference materials and CDs and DVDs that I need.
That's awesome. That's I can't wait. That's my background. My background is sports car racing, and just Porsche in general has always fascinated me. So I can't wait.
Yeah, cool.
I want to ask you a question, and again, it goes back to the Mark Green conversation you had, and at the time you had just recently acquired, I believe, your Cunningham, and I do have some questions I've said about the Cunningham. What car, because you achieved a point that a lot of us get to, and you said the Cunningham was always a dream car, and you're never going to get one because they only built 18, 23, 25, whatever the number is. What car do you have that what car do you have that kind of most excites you? Whether, I don't know if you drive a CTSV daily and that's it, or is it the Cunningham, or is it, I think at the time you were building a Highboy. Is it that 289 Cobra? What car do you have or has went through your hands? Give me a little bit about Tom Cotter and something that you've always wanted to be asked and you've never been asked.
Well, my interests are so diverse that I can't say I'm a sports car guy. I can't say I'm a hot rodder. I can't say I'm a drag racer. I can't say I'm a road racer. I can't say I'm a classic car guy because I'm all of the above. If you would ask me, I ask this to a lot of people, people like Jay Leno, and if I took away all your cars and gave you the opportunity to take one back, what would it be? So if I asked myself that same question, it would be my Cobra, because that's a car that I have dreamed about since 5th grade. And always knew that was what I aspired someday to own. And never, a lot of things you aspire to never come true, but at least it's a guiding light to kind of give you inspiration to keep working hard. So I didn't think I'd actually ever get a Cobra, but wow, it happened. The car that excites me the most that I own is the Cunningham, because here's a car that I dreamed of owning and really, again, never thought I'd own it. Whereas in the Cobra world, they made 998 authentic Cobras. So I had a 1 in 998 chance of owning one of those. In the Cunningham world, there were only 36 cars ever made. And of those, only the street cars, there were 27, 22, probably 28 or 29 street cars. And certainly, those were all, sitting in millionaire collections somewhere here and there. And son of a gun, I followed up a lead that I never thought was possible. And there was one in Greenville, South Carolina, in a guy's basement. And it took several years to be able to, he invited me over to look at it, but made it clear he wasn't selling it. And several years later, I wound up owning it. And now it is the most amazing car. I mean, here's a car owned by a guy that, it was built in West Palm Beach, Florida, by a guy that didn't want to be a manufacturer of cars, but because of homologation rules at 24 Hours of Le Mans, he had to build 25 street cars. And mine is the second of those 25, with 331 Chrysler Hemi, 4 carburetors, built in West Palm Beach, Florida, then bodied in Italy. So it's an American hot rod with an Italian body. It's like the best of both worlds.
Oh my God.
And here's a car that I have taken to the Concours d'Elegance, several of them, and here's a rat rod looking car. I bought it and it was flat black primer. I don't know why it was painted that way. At some point in probably the early 60s, somebody primered it. Well, I just left it that way, and I went through it mechanically. But otherwise, the headliner's hanging down, the seats are ripped. And so mechanically, it's superb. So I've taken it to Concours d'Elegance because it's the only one that's not restored. I have taken it to rat rod shows. I have hill climbed it a couple of times, once at Hershey, once at Mount Equinox. I have vintage road raced it at Lime Rock. Haggerty wants to know if I'm interested in racing it this year in a dirt drag race that they are sponsoring somewhere. I've taken it on tours. It's been written about in magazines and newspapers. I can't imagine a car that you can do as much with as I've done with that car. So I'd sell the Cobra last, but the car that excites me the most is the Cunningham. But then again, I've got a 67 Ford Country Squire station wagon that I found on one of my road trips. Think about that. A 67 Ford Country Squire. It's a 5,000-pound car with dual-facing rear seats, fake wood siding, contact paper and plastic wood. It's got a 428 cubic inch engine, factory, 4-speed manual gearbox, factory, bucket seats from the factory, and a console. That's from the factory, only one ever made like that. So I'm excited about that car too. I've got a Mini Cooper, a Morris Minor that I put on 2 wheels on racing circuits. I've got my Woody wagon that I bought when I was 15 years old for $300 in 1969. The cars that I aspire to, I have. I've got the cars I love, and that's why it's so hard for me to sell cars. I buy cars easily, and I sell cars hard. I buy cars, and they become a part of me. They're my friends. And, now I'm getting the age where, I don't need 20 cars anymore. So I'm starting to sell cars off. And I got to tell you, it's like chopping off my arm. It's hard to do.
Are
there any cars? Oh, yeah. And so are there cars that I aspire to own? No, there's not. I don't need to own any more cars. Now I'm invited to drive cars, race cars, and it's such a cool thing to do. I just drove Dan Gurney's 67 Mercury Cougar at Sebring. That is my all-time favorite vintage Trans Am car. 289, 2 4-barrels, almost a completely stock Cougar. And I'm out there racing in a car that my hero drove on the same circuit that he drove it on. I was like, holy mackerel. I recently drove for a road test for a magazine, Ford GT number 1046, which won Le Mans in 1966. It's the car that won the race that Ford versus Ferrari movie was based on. I drove the car that Chris Amon and Bruce McLaren drove to the win, the black number 2. The car. I'm driving down I-77 in Charlotte with, moms and SUVs next to me and UPS trucks. And holy crap, I'm driving a car that a guy paid $21 million for.
And none of those people actually saw you either because the car's too low. They had no idea you were
only
there.
40 inches from the ground. Yeah. But unfortunately, with the coronavirus now, a lot of the races that I had hoped to attend have been canceled or postponed to later in the year. In Summit Point, West Virginia, there's a great Summit Point Raceway, and a friend of mine, Brian Walsh, whose dad was Jerry Walsh, and he was known to racers as Racer Walsh, for being the guy that sold Pinto parts. And I used to race at Jerry Walsh Pinto. Well, Brian just bought the car and driver Pinto that Pap Bedard and Don Sherman used to race in the Showroom Stock Series back in the 70s. And Brian said, I just bought the car and driver Pinto. Do you want to drive it? I said, oh, hell yes, do I. Well, that race has been canceled, so I hope that opportunity happens again sometime in the future. So I don't have to own cars. Now it seems I can drive cars and love them from a distance.
You sound like you have a very similar personality to me. It doesn't really matter what the car is, where it is, what wheels are driving the car, how much power it has. Just drive the car.
Yep.
Am I right in that? You just want to drive?
Oh, I just want to drive. And right now, I look for excuses to drive someplace. And I look for excuses to take secondary roads to get there and find things along the way, or maybe meet people along the way. And I got to say this, I've never even heard of a fraternity like the car community that it seems like we're all friends. Just most of us haven't met yet. And I'll knock on some crabby guy's door in West Virginia to ask about the backyard full of cars he's got. And if I were driving a new, black Suburban or something, they'd say, no, get out of here. I'm not interested. But sitting in his driveway is a 39 Ford Woody wagon. And I'm knocking on his door asking about the rusty Hudson in the backyard. And suddenly I'm as interesting to him as he is to me. And I say, come on in, have some iced tea. So I've never met a group of people that within 15 minutes, we're friends like we've known each other since high school. Amazing.
I said it earlier. It's something about the cars. I've got a buddy, and I can't figure out whenever amazingly, he's another Model T owner. This one lives in Detroit. He felt like, or when he goes to a new town, the first thing he does when he gets there is drives all the back alleys to see what cars are parked behind houses. Oh, yeah. And I guess that's something to do. I've never brought myself to do it. It's things I want to do, and I'm beginning to get to an age where I'm going, I've got to do some of this stuff and quit wanting and quit putting it off until tomorrow.
All right, John, we'll just go ahead and invite you, Tom. Let's do a PCH barn find road trip. That sounds like fun.
Now let me ask you.
You know what? I've given off clubs. I've given up on clubs. The problem is I join a club and then I wind up running it, and then it winds up running me, and so I don't join clubs anymore.
That's why I have the podcast. I became president of so many different car clubs, and it just kind of burns you out because now, as much as we've said nice about car people, there's some people in car clubs that you just don't want to have to deal with and their ideas, and you differences of opinion. But that's car clubs. I believe in this. I'm exactly like you. I don't care what you drive as long as it's a car. I show interest, and I've commented a couple times today that working at the Barber Museum, and at the time we had 58 Lotus, and I think they're a little over 60 now. And people would ask me what my favorite car there was to drive, and I'm a Lotus guy, and I absolutely love Lotus. But we got this donation in probably 2010, 2011 of a 50 Plymouth deluxe, four-door coupe. Or four-door sedan, and it's a home restoration. The guy did it himself. It was a family car. His dad owned it. He remembered traveling in it. His brother got it. He got it. And that 3 on a tree, inline 6, that was the car I had the most pleasure driving, having fun with. I mean, the Lotus are great, but for some reason, I like the 50 Plymouth more than just about anything we had there. I have a question about you.
About Lotus. I drove a road test. I was out in Colorado Springs, and Colorado in Denver, and drove a Lotus Elan. A guy named William Taylor, who's a well-known author of Lotus books. He invited me to take his car out for a day, and I had never driven a Lotus, and it's hard for me to get in one because of my lanky legs. But I got out of that road test, and in that story, I said that this is the best sports car I have ever driven, and I've got 2 now in my garage. I want to restore both of them, but I've decided to do one at a time. I know where you're at. I love Lotuses as well, and one of these days I'll have mine on the road. But I'm in the middle of restoration, and I love it. It's the simplest car. It's so simple. The body comes off the frame. The frame weighs 40 pounds. The body weighs 140 pounds. It's like, this can't be real. It's like a toy. It's wonderful.
I don't fit in them at all.
That's why I got into restoring, I think, little sports cars and that. I'm a little guy. I'm 5'7". I'm not bulky by any means. And I just like the lightness. And, I could pick up the engine block of, an MG or a Lotus or something. I can't pick up a 302 or a 350. Or
Yep.
I guess... Is that the road and track vibe there, too? Because Peter Egan, for years did the restoration to his Elan. And if I remember right, his maiden voyage was driving from Michigan down to Barber's for a Lotus Owners Gathering event back in 09 or 10 or something. And
and he sold it soon thereafter because he was so disappointed in it. But he bought that car based on... I wrote a story in one of my barn find books that this guy in New Jersey had a barn find Elan, and it was in a book. And Peter called me up and said, "Can you give me the phone number of that guy? I'd like to buy it." And he wanted to buy in that car. Well, Peter bailed out too soon. I think, he's got patience, but he felt the car let him down. He said, "Never have I had a car that was so mean to me. I treated it so well, and it was so mean to me back." I think if he had just hung on a little bit more, because I've talked to the guy who owns it now. He bought it from Peter, and a couple of bugs worked out, and he says it's an amazing car.
Part of the game is spending a little bit of time, and as I've said, restored a Cunningham there, and that's where we got it to, is to that point where it's restored, and then you've got to sort out all the little bugs and stuff over the next year. I've asked this question to many, many people, and I'm going to ask you because of your Cunningham involvement, and I've seen a few of them. When I did this restoration, there was only one other Cunningham being restored, and I believe that was by like RPM Motorsports up in Connecticut or something, and I got some information, and I drove over to Tennessee and sat down with one of the members of the Cunningham family and looked at the car he had in his garage and that. And on the car that I did, I think it was chassis 5210, it has a little gauge on it, and to this day, 15, 20 years later, I have no clue what it does or where I was supposed to connect it. And I know it cost the car owner some points at some concours and that. But do you have a fuel dash oil pressure gauge on your car? This car had an oil pressure gauge. It had a fuel pressure gauge, and it had an amp meter and a fuel gauge, but it had a fuel oil pressure gauge. And for the life of me, and to literally hundreds of people I've asked, nobody has a clue where that's supposed to go.
Well, if the car was closer, it's in a warehouse. It's about 20 miles from here. But if it was closer, I'd run out there right now and look at it. But I don't know. It's got a lot of gauges. I'll tell you that, and they're beautiful. They were U.S. gauges that the Cunningham team shipped over to Vignali when the car was bodied, and Vignali took American gauges and built them into Italian surroundings and made these very Ferrari-ish looking gauge clusters that are just beautiful. But if you have to have them rebuilt, it's Ford stuff. It's just amazing. It's really, really pretty cool.
We obviously did that with that car. And like I said, that's just a puzzling piece. It's the unknown. All the research I do and everything that I do, I just can't figure out where that piece is supposed to go.
So I told you before that there were 36 Cunninghams built in total. A C2R was destroyed at Pebble Beach in the 50s. So 35 remain. And I put together a class at the Greenwich Concourse 2 years ago, where of the 35 Cunninghams on Earth, 33 were on the field. And the two that didn't show up, one being a Miles Collier car, which he said because the paint's peeling off, it doesn't want to leave the building. And another had a real good excuse in Washington, D.C. We had 33 Cunninghams in numerical order by production, by serial number, spanning the sewer of the Long Island Sound on this beautiful lawn. And you could go from car to car to car and look at changes that were made. And, look at, they used Chrysler radio on this one. They used the Ford radio on this one. It was just an amazing scene. And, the Revs collection, Miles Collier brought his race cars out there. Fred Simeone brought the Le Mans car that finished third at Le Mans, the C4R. It was just an amazing grouping of cars. Just amazing. And then we had some Briggs Cunningham cars that were, that he raced, that he didn't build, like the lightweight Jaguar E-Type Coupe and cars like that, 904 Porsche. So these were Cunningham cars painted in Cunningham colors, white with blue stripes. He didn't build them. And so what a collection. It'll never happen again. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I wanted to go to that so bad, but I can't remember. I had something come up last minute, and it prevented me because I knew very little about the Cunningham before undertaking this project, and afterwards I've just kind of, I don't say diehard followed him, but I've definitely casually followed him and, tried to pay attention and see where things are going and what's going on. And I just, kind of like the Briggs story, and, he tried.
He won Elkhart Lake. He won Sebring. He won Watkins Glen. Tons of other races in the States, and he almost won Le Mans. And he finished third twice. That ain't bad for a little operation that operated out of like a 5-car garage in West Palm Beach, Florida. That ain't bad.
Believe, isn't that how Shelby started too? Just a couple of guys in a garage, a couple of madmen, and of course he had some little bit of racing history there too. And Cunningham had a little bit more money behind him than Shelby did, but.
Hearing y'all talk about the Cunningham, I can't help but make a correlation, and John may kick me completely off the podcast for this. I don't know. Now suddenly the Maserati Ghibli has more weight to it in my mind. Just Italian with Chrysler guts, basically. It sort of ties in. Yep. It definitely ties in, and it makes me wonder because I don't know globally if the Ghibli's doing well, but it's not doing really well here, and there's not going to be many of those cars out there. So, is the Ghibli the future collector Cunningham possibly?
I don't know. I don't know. If
Italian with Detroit ties.
I would venture. Well, I'd venture to say no, but
that's why I said. I mean, John's going to kick me off right after this. John's going to basically dress me down and tell me never to come back just for bringing that up. But there is a tie-in.
And I think, I personally love, in fact, the Studebaker Museum did a show a couple of years ago. Mike Cunningham was invited there, and it was, hybrids. It was American hybrids. And so it was the Cunningham, it was Cobra, it was the Sunbeam Tiger, it was Iso Grifo, it was Fossil Vega. It was, it was just a really cool, all these cars shared one thing, an American power plant, but everything else was, foreign. So just an amazing show.
Very cool.
That's kind of interesting how the I want to say American power plants have got into or kept a lot of these things alive or were able to create. I mean, it's kind of, we joke, I guess, about LS motors and everything's LS powered now, and that's the easy swap. And if you're going to build something, put an LS in it. And it's kind of, I think, maybe sports car racing revolved a little bit around it. It was easy to drop a Ford or a Chevy motor into anything. I've got a acquaintance, and maybe you know him, and I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote Bowtie Ferraris and Blue Oval Ferraris.
Oh, I have that.
Yeah.
Yep, I got both of them.
Randy, somebody, I believe, is the author.
He's passed away now.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. He knew him. He came out to a couple of events and liked his books, and he just, because of these American power plants, a lot of those Ferraris still exist today.
Right, exactly. Yep.
If another one of those shows,
so, I'm a hot rodder. I'm a hot rodder at heart. So, popping an American motor in a foreign car doesn't hurt my feelings at all.
So wish we had Will here. He could. He owns a place called Big Oak Garage, and that's what he does, is build hot rods. He's the fourth wheel of this podcast, but he's still. I think he's got 3 SEMA debuts this year, provided SEMA actually happens. He might get an extra 12 months on those, but he's, and again, hot rods provide. I've had some, engine swap vehicles over the years and come up with some creative things. And go back to I kind of asked, what question haven't we asked you that you've always? What's a little Tom Cotter, behind the scenes that you want to talk about and nobody ever talks to you enough about? We've dwelled on your books and your Cunningham and your Cobra, and there's got to be something in there. You've got a couple of cars from your youth, which many of us would love to have, but I never had the room, or I traded cars so often when I was younger, it just wouldn't have been feasible.
Well, I've actually had 3 cars. I've got a car I bought when I was 15, which is a 39 Ford Woody. I've got a 53 Ford 2-door wagon that I bought when I was 18. The guy wanted $100, and I didn't have 100, so I talked him down to 85, and I still have that car. And I have a car that I bought 40 years ago this year, 1980, a 1960 Volkswagen convertible, 36 horsepower, and I built this car kind of as if it was 1950s, and I wanted a Porsche Speedster, but couldn't afford it. So this 60 Volkswagen convertible has Speedster wheels on it. It has Motolita wooden steering wheel. It has Speedster grills on the headlights. The 36 horsepower is still original, but I put a Judson supercharger on it, and I have A-Barth exhaust back, an early set of A-Barth exhaust. So that I've had that in my garage for 40 years. What can you ask Tom Cotter? I've always been kind of true to my passion in that when I was on Long Island and I wanted to get a job so bad in the car industry, somehow, some way, especially the racing business, and nobody had the time for me. I'd see people at a race or at a show, at a convention, and whatever. And I was a student, or I was repairing, Datsuns or selling furniture. How do I get where you are? What is it that you did that maybe I can, just give me an idea? I don't have time for that. There's no opportunities. Forget it. And I made it my point to promise myself that if I ever actually made it and had an opportunity to give back, I would. And so therefore I've spent really my whole professional career, when somebody says, can I go to lunch with you, or can I have a phone call with you, or could you look at my resume or give me an opinion on something I want to do? I always find time to do it, because I said, there was nobody that gave me that time of day when I was in my early 20s or whatever, that I don't want that a person to go through that same frustration, and maybe the car business lose that person forever. Maybe they wind up going into some other career because the car business let them down. And so, even though I've been out of that kind of world, the agency world, for almost 20 years, still, when I've recently taught at a college about motorsport marketing and PR, and I found it so rewarding to talk to students and give them career advice. Can I stay after class and ask you some questions or whatever? And so, to me, this is the point in my life where I'm looking forward to giving back. And it's not all about acquisition. and selfish motives. It's about seeing that the future of the car hobby and the car industry moves forward. And if I can help it, I will. I'm involved with a great college out in Kansas called McPherson College, which offers a 4-year bachelor's degree in automotive restoration. And I absolutely love going out there. I love meeting the students. I love helping to advise and give course directions and corrections, and sitting in on classes and going out doing fundraising events. I absolutely love it. And when those students, graduate with a bachelor's degree, they go to work for Paul Russell, or they go to work for Ralph Lauren, or they go to work for the Peterson Collection or the Revs Museum. It's just amazing where these young people go. So that's the future of our hobby, and everything I can help them achieve, I jump at.
I don't know if you were aware, but I'm a graduate of McPherson, and that's where Will, the other co-host that I was talking about, we both were graduates of McPherson and spent some time out there, and loved the program. It underwent a huge change while we were there, and a lot of that was bringing on the advisory board, which I know you're part of now, and the program has grown so much it'd almost be fun to go back through it, because I think the opportunities, it opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I did the first internship with Craig Jackson out of that, had to develop the whole intern program, and drove out.
And you lived through it, huh? you lived through the internship with Craig? Yeah.
And that was just a 3 or 4 day thing for his auction. And Drew was his right-hand man at the time. It was the year before Russo became a company. And, I think I've told the story. I think I pulled into Scottsdale at like 2 a.m, and I called Drew, and he said, "Call me whenever you get in, no matter what time." And I called him at 2 a.m, and he said, "Can you come in?" I said, "I just got off the road after 17 hours. I said, "Can I sleep?" Man. He said, "Yeah, be here at 6. So, and it was 4 of the hardest days I've ever worked in my life, but 4 of the most exciting. I learned so much, and and Barrett Jackson at the time was probably a third of the size of what it is now. So, Will and I talk a lot about that program, and we stand behind it wholeheartedly. It can't, it opens doors, but kind of, as you said before, just don't go there and expect when you graduate the door to be open. You have to work your time there and impress these people that invest their time into making sure the program's good.
Yep.
I've got one last thing, and I'm going to let you go just because you said it. And this has been a passion, and I've been looking for probably 20 or 25 years. Looking Hemmings, eBay, and I don't say I do it all the time, but it's always a casual look. And
whatever it is, I'll find it. Whatever it is, I'll find it for you.
Well, the problem is you have it. Okay. My dad, when he was a teenager, his first car was a '60 Volkswagen convertible, and I have looked for years. He kind of did a restoration to it, and his dad and his uncle worked for International Harvester. One was an accounts payable receivable, and one was on the line, and somehow they got a couple gallons of International Harvester red paint and painted it International Harvester red in that. And he drove it until he got broadsided at a intersection, and he said we became a tilt-a-whirl. But I've kind of always tried to pay attention to see if I could find a '60 Volkswagen convertible for sale, and I find 59s, I find 61s, I find 63s, and here we are in this conversation, and I love the irony and how small the world can become. I don't expect to make an offer on your car, and or anything. I just wanted to say it's going to be something, and I'll mention to my dad, and he'll probably get a kick out of it. And if you can, email me a picture of your car. And I'd love to see how it went, Porsche style. But that was the last thing. Cool. Last thing I wanted to do. We told you we would bother you for about an hour today, and that's we've recorded for an hour 3, and I know you were on the phone for 15 minutes prior to that. So,
well, you know what? It's fun, and if you want to go for another hour, I'm prepared to do that too. So
I can.
You haven't gotten all of me, but if you want to do it some other time, give me a shout.
Game on. Let's marathon it. We're here till midnight.
Marathon. I'm a marathon runner, by the way, and I'm the Boston Marathon. was to be held in a month. That's been postponed now until September, so it gives me 6 more months to practice. But I'm a marathoner. That's the only thing I do besides cars, marathons.
And there's that little thing that we've been looking the whole episode for, that little Tom Cotter piece. And now I have something to go back to my fiance, because she took up running last year, and she's not doing marathons yet, but I think she's registered for a half marathon this year. I don't know when or what'll happen.
The half marathon is the perfect length race. Because just as you get exhausted, it's over. When you do a marathon, you get to that halfway point, and sucker, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I can believe that, and she has a MS too, so she adds another degree of difficulty to it. But I'm amazed and I'm impressed with her in doing that. And I just say 13 miles, 25 miles. That's why I have a car.
Yeah.
So, Sean, I saw you rubbing your hands together there. Are you, do you have another question for Tom?
I don't have another question. Y'all just started talking about air-cooled Volkswagens, and now I'm going to have to go on the Samba and look at Type 2s, and costing me money. I've had a 62 and a 67 Type 2, and I really want another one. Unfortunately, they're in rarefied air these days. These things are crazy expensive these days.
I had a 61 crew cab, rust-free, amazing car, and I had it for a few years, and I sold it to a guy who still owns it today. But the problem is, he took my rust-free car and parked it in his backyard, and now it's sunk down to the chassis, and it is complete rot box. And he says, if you want to buy it back, you could buy it. I said, I couldn't do that. When I gave it to you, it's like putting a child up for adoption, and you've abused this child.
Right.
Holy crap. Yeah. So sad. A rust-free car, and now it's just like, you can restore it, but man, you'd have your work cut out for you.
Yeah, just grab a Busboys catalog and go to town, man.
And depending how long ago you sold it, he's probably asking about the same price. I'm guessing just the way.
Oh, he's asking a lot more. He's asking a lot more, actually.
Yeah. It's in basket case. I actually posted a picture not too long ago that was of a Type 2, but it was decayed to the level of like a first generation Lancia. It was like there was nothing left of it. It was just a pile of rust. And it was like asking $87,000, no low ballers. I know what I have. It's just like they bring crazy money. Like, would you consider this is a question that I'll ask, because I love air-cooled Volkswagens. Would you consider, if anybody ever came out with a kit version of a Type 2 that was actually nice, something along the lines of like a Kirkham Cobra, would you consider something like that? Or are you more of the pure?
Well, at this stage of my life, no. But
no.
I am intrigued with continuation cars that are kind of factory authorized, like the Caterham 7s, and there's an intriguing part of that. But would I build one now? What I would maybe do is I built a Myers Manx a number of years ago. I'd build another one of those. That was easy and fun, and it was rewarding, and it was great.
I've always wanted to build a Manx or some form of rail VW for autocross.
Yeah, the problem is there's no weight in the front, and they wind up understeering like crazy.
Weight it in the front, put some aero up there. You can put all the tire in the world on it, right? There's no fender. So you literally
you can put cement bags.
Yeah, you put 335s on each corner of it. Big old splitter in the front. Get the thing, set it up like a prepared car where you've got a giant arrow all around on it. And you could build it for like $3 and 5 weekends.
Right. Right.
It just sounds like fun.
Yep.
I think we're gonna not to be rude, but it's you're East Coast, so you're probably about dinner time, and we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we might invite you back. I'm planning on having Nathan on, and we might be a good time to have you back and let you two chat a little bit about that cross-country jaunt in the Model T. That's something I really want to hear in depth, and I think that could be an interesting story. I guess I better order the book and read the book. But get a little bit of that in background. But I really want to thank you for taking the time and on such short notice to do this. And here we are knocking on your door, and this time you never thought you'd get interrupted. And again, you said you seem to provide time when people ask, and we definitely thank you. I'm sorry Derek wasn't with us today. He really wanted to be and chat a little bit. Probably thank you for some of the stuff you've helped him out with over the years. And if I would have,
no problem. John and Sean, it's been a blast, man.
Very much looking forward to the Porsche book, and like John said, thanks for your time.
All right, sir. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Bye.